All right. So without any further ado, I want to introduce our opening keynote speaker. He is the guy who, when I said I'm going to podcast, and then did my first episode and forgot to turn on the microphone and was like, I need to learn how to podcast, I started listening to his podcast. It changed how I podcast. It has made me better, and every week, I've been doing this for 5 years, every week when I listen to his shows, multiple of his shows every week, I learn something a little bit new, I improve my own craft, and so we really, when we said, who are we going to invite to be the keynote speaker, he was our first choice. He got right back to us, so without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Dave Jackson.
I got this one. Is this the right one? That'll work. Thank you very much. I've never been to Utah. It's very, very pretty out here. Let's get to the boring slide, shall we? This is called the basement of your podcast, because the basement is what you build your house on. Thank you, by the way, for doing this. I was going to ask you to do that. So this is the boring slide. I've been podcasting since 2005. I started the School of Podcasting back then. I have over 2.1 million downloads now. I work for Libsyn. It's a media hosting company. I'm an award-winning podcaster, and last year they inducted me into the Podcasters Hall of Fame. Yes, there is a Podcasters Hall of Fame. So, and it looked like that. So, and those are my websites. And what we want to talk about today is starting a good podcast. I was like, hey, I'm opening keynote. Let's start there. So I thought I would, let's just peel back the curtain and really show you like where you can start. This is where I started. This is the basement of my brother's house. I was bankrupt and divorced. What a great combination. And what was cool is that little green bookcase was gone, and I had wedged a desk in there because I remember I couldn't pull out the bottom drawer because it would hit the water heater. And yes, that is the furnace on the other side. And behind me, just to have the total trifecta, I had a flush pipe. So I had to record and hope that nobody had to go to the bathroom, that it wasn't cold outside. It was awesome. So I say that. What's great about this is 14 years later, it hasn't really changed much. That's my desk in my apartment. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to take a picture of that because people think you have to have this awesome studio and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, I've got, we got Post-it notes. We have tax documentation under the first monitor. That's a good one. And it's just a mess. So you don't have to have the absolute perfect setup to start your podcast. Just start where you are. I started off again in the basement. I'm a musician, so I had a microphone lying around. So that was kind of cool. But you don't have to spend $1,500 to start your podcast. So, true or false? Starting a podcast is hard. False? Really? Anybody? All right. How many people think false? All right. How many people think true? All right. Well, did you read my slide? It's false. And you're like, wait, I'm thinking it's pretty hard. No, it's false. Why? Because it's a trick question. Starting a good podcast is hard. Because you can fire up Anchor and start a podcast in 5 minutes. That wasn't that hard. It's also not that good, maybe, potentially. So yeah, now starting a new podcast is scary because for many of you, it's getting over this thing in your head. That's the hard part. So I don't want to sit here and go, oh, podcasting is easy because I've been doing it forever. So yeah, it's easy for me, but I still at times have to get over the old, I'm drawing a blank. What do you call it? Imposter syndrome. Tell her what she's won. All right, so yeah, we think we have to be perfect. I can't start until I do, and then when we get the thing, then we're gonna, no, it doesn't have to be perfect. If you aim at perfect and you miss, you end up at, wow, that was pretty good. And so many people will not start until it's never gonna be perfect. It's just not. That's just not the way we are. So I thought about the Liberty Bell. Why? Because it's not perfect, but yet it's still pretty famous. In fact, that thing hasn't been rung since D-Day. I just found that when I was doing some research. So what do you call a bell that you can't ring? This isn't a joke or anything like, ba-dum-bum. Two guys walk into a bar. No. What do you call a bell that doesn't ring? What is it? Landmark, good term. Anybody else? It's a symbol, right? At this point, it's a symbol. So why do we go crazy about symbols? Right? They inspire us and they move us. Why? We're digging a little deeper. Why does a symbol, like when we see it, we go, oh, you're right. If we see the American flag, we're like, oh, or whatever the symbol is. Why do symbols inspire us and move us? Representation. Tell them what she's won. Exactly. Because of what it stands for. That's when you like, and I thought about this. I thought about different podcasts that are really crushing it. And they really got an engaged community, because really that's what we want. Downloads are cool, but I would much rather have an engaged community. I would rather have a really engaged, smaller podcast audience than millions of downloads of people that I can't say their name. So what is that? And it is belief. If you think about it, true communities share a belief. When I first went to the very first podcast expo out in Ontario, California, and there was like, I don't know, 50 of us tops. And we were like, hey, man, radio stinks. We are going to take over the world. We've got a global audience. Because back in the day, I don't think they had like streaming iHeart yet. And we were like, ha, radio, you have a signal. We can go global. And we're going to tell it. We're going to take it to the man. And birds a waving, buddy. We were ready to take over the world. So it was a belief. So, and that belief for your audience may just be as simple as your show delivers value. One of the shows I listen to is the No Agenda Show. And it's really cool because they spend hours going through, they kind of dissect the media. And so I don't know that I could say, here's what they believe in. They believe that the media tries to manipulate you. But I do believe that that's really a very valuable show. So, Dave Ramsey, right? There's a guy, cash is king. That's what he believes. Right, and he also believes the lottery is just the stupid tax, right? So there's that. Lee Silverstein does a show called We Have Cancer. What does his audience believe? That cancer sucks and cancer is not a death sentence. Lee has stage 4. He had colon cancer. It used to be the colon cancer podcast. He's had it for like 9 years. And when you hear stage 4 cancer, you're usually like, okay, well, time to get your things in order. Not for Lee. This one I love. Lisa Beats Your Meat. When I saw the title of that podcast, I'm like, that's going in the presentation. What is it? It's a vegan podcast. Think about vegans. These are people that believe, they have a shared belief that whatever, meat is bad and cow farts are going to kill us all in 12 years, right? But they have a shared belief, and that community is really strong. When you get into things like, now we're into nerddom, right? Picard versus Kirk or whatever, or, since we're talking about belief, right, we got to get some invisible sky buddy talking here. So you have Jesus, and then, of course, there's Judaism, and there's atheism, and there's all sorts of eons out there. A true, to me, community has a shared belief, which means you have to state an opinion. Now, I'm not saying you have to be a shock jock and just say shocking things, but you are going to have to say something that maybe people don't agree with. So what will your audience say you believe? So, Brandon, I'm going to put you on the spot. What would my audience say I believe in? I got him with his mouth full, too. It's even better.
I think a lot of it is getting to the point.
Getting to the point?
And producing good quality.
All right. Anybody else listen to my show? Cool. So tell me what I believe. Everybody can podcast, all right? Anybody else? Nobody's going to mention that I think Anchor sucks? Come on, seriously? There we go. All right. So I really thought that was I did this for the School of Podcasting members, and I'm like, what do you think I believe in? And one person's like, Anchor sucks. I'm like, I love you. Excellent. So, yeah, what are you going to stand up for? And again, you don't have to, I'm not talking about, I'm going to say super shocking things. But you do have to kind of be yourself. And if you're going to be yourself, that means you probably have an opinion. And so keep that in mind. If you try to be everything to everyone, you'll be nothing to no one. Hence the vanilla ice cream in the back. You can't be vanilla. You can. If you think about super famous people, I don't know, Paris Hilton, Donald Trump. Ooh, I don't even want to say that word because that just brings, but I mean, a lot of times polarizing people are famous. Why? Because they say what they believe and they are themselves. So to make a good podcast, step 1, who is your audience? You have to know who your audience is. And that means you might have to go where they are, figure out what they're talking about, because if it's going to be good, right? We said we want to make a good podcast. You have to know who is listening to it and then figure out what they want. If you have the Secret Santa at work and you get Harold from accounting, and you're like, I don't even work in accounting. Well, you'd have to find somebody in accounting to find out what Harold wanted so you could give him what he wants for Christmas, right? You have to know who your audience is. You have to know why. Why am I doing this podcast? Because I've seen people that they'll start a show, and I'm going to interview entrepreneurs. And why are you starting the podcast? Because I want to sell more paint from my paint store. And I'm like, I'm not sure I can connect those two unless the entrepreneurs you're talking to just bought a house and need to paint it. So you want the content to be in alignment with why you're doing the podcast, and you need to know why you're doing the podcast. If you can't say why you're doing the podcast, if you can't say the why, you're never going to make it through the how. Because it's that why are the times when you're doing a podcast and you put that first one out and you count your cousins and your mom and you're like, wait, I got 9 downloads. Wait, I have 12 members in my family. Somebody didn't listen. So that's when you get kind of frustrated. But if you have that why, I'm doing this because I want to help people, or I'm doing this because I want to inspire people, or whatever it is, then you can pull through. So one of the ways you can do this, I don't see here, somebody's talking about stories later on today. One of the ways you can do this is through stories. And if you think about it, all through our lives, at least for me, one of my earliest childhood memories is my grandpa reading me stories. So we all love stories. It makes it entertaining. So, right? Spoiler alert, who won Game of Thrones? Anybody remember? Yeah, anybody? Exactly. Anybody remember why this guy won? No. They said because he had the best story. Stories win. Not so, and apparently in ratings too, right? All right. So if I'm doing an interview show, and for the record, you don't have to do an interview show, but if I'm doing an interview show, you don't have to, well, let's go this route. You want to get your guest telling stories. So one of the ways you can do that is not say, tell me a little bit about yourself. That drives me nuts, because if you said that to me, I could actually say, well, I was born in Akron, Ohio. My favorite color is purple and black, and my brother is this. And no. A better question might be, when did you know you wanted to be a podcaster? Now that's a story, and it's focused, and it's getting right into whatever your topic is. You could say, what hurdles did you have to overcome to do whatever? Who helped you the most? What was the best piece of advice you've ever received? All these are stories. What was your early success? What fears did you have? How did you overcome blank to do that? There's no way to not get a story about this. Tell me about a time when. Tell me about a time when you didn't think you could do something and yet you did. That's a great story. Get them telling stories. How did the conversation go when? If you can get somebody to do that, wow, now we're getting super intimate. So when you decided to move your family from New York to Florida to do podcasting full time, what was the conversation like with your wife? Right? That would be that'd be a great story. Looking back, what was your favorite memory? These are all things that get people telling stories. Now, here's the other thing. When you're doing an interview show, you want to speak less and listen more. The key to a great interview is a little preparation. I usually have a set of questions that I've already kind of figured out that I know are going to point my guest in the direction I want to go. I have an empty pad in front of me and a pen that doesn't click. I ask a question and I listen. And I'm just listening for, okay, is this something? And this is where interviews aren't that easy, because you're listening to what they're saying. You're trying to figure out, do I ask a follow-up question? And if so, what is the follow-up question? So, but if you haven't watched it yet, David Letterman has My Next Guest Needs No Introduction, the new season. Watch the Ellen DeGeneres episode and watch the Tiffany Haddish episode. The Ellen DeGeneres episode especially, he goes, because first of all, David knows the answer to all these questions because he's done his research. And he goes, and then your mom married a really bad guy. And Ellen went, yep. And Dave went, is that all we're getting out of that? And then he shut up. He shut up. Didn't say a peep. Didn't say, we don't have to talk about this if you don't want. Don't have to, I want to make her comfortable. He shut up. And she went, well, I'm not sure. Well, because, and she just sat, and he just let her flounder. And eventually she decided in her head, I am going to actually tell this story, because her stepfather molested her. And she told the story. If he had given her a way out, she would have taken it, because it's not easy to tell that story. But he shut up, and that's really the key. Ask a question and shut up. It's about your guest. It's not about you. So it takes a little practice. Don't me too it. I love that when somebody goes, my favorite color is orange. And I go, me too. I've been watching orange. And I'm like, wait, the audience just heard that point. We don't really need to hear it again. So interviews build your network, because some people are like, well, should I do an interview show or should I do a solo show? And I'm like, when did this become either or? How about both? I do interview shows. Why? Because they build my network. And now I have friends that I can call on and say, hey, can you do this thing? I know this guy that does this thing. Can you do that? Build your network. If you do a solo show, it builds your audience. Why? Because I'm now talking to you. I'm talking directly to you. And now you're going to get to know, like, and trust me. Now I'm building my influence. And when you combine influence and a network, now we're talking a show that's going to grow. But you're like, but Dave, how do I get stories out of myself? Well, you just bring them on out. Here's one. I'm a guitar player. When Chuck Berry died, I know a lot about Chuck Berry. And I've said, hey, there are things that podcasters can learn about, being a better podcast, being an innovator, making your own sound, things like that. And for a while, it just kind of looked like I was, you'll see here where it looked like I was just reading the obituaries, looking for ideas. But Kevin Hart is not dead, which is great. But his book here says, I can't make this up. Great book, by the way. If you've not read this book, it's the ultimate book in your attitude, because this guy has been shot down so many times. And his answer is, you know what? All right. I'm going to be so funny, you can't ignore me. And he just keeps coming back and back. And now he's in about every other movie that's made, I think is how that works. But I was a huge Muhammad Ali fan. And when he died, I was like, all right, this guy's so much more than a boxer. And here's what podcasters can learn from that. Amazon, you may have heard of this company. And I said, hey, there's a lot of things that they do that we could implement over on our show. My background's in training, and I've done classes in all sorts of bizarre places, and one of them is the Akron Zoo. And so I learned how they make their environments for the animals there tailored to the animal first, and then they figure out how can we get the people around that. And I was like, ooh, kind of like tailoring your content for your target audience, and then how can I get my podcast audience to come find that? So you can just share the stories of your life, and all of those are, for me, making a point. I want to make my audience laugh, cry, think, groan. I'm going to educate or entertain. If I'm not doing any of those, I do not press record. Laugh, cry, think, groan, educate, or entertain. So, and I do that through stories. What do you mean you don't edit your show? When I talk to radio people, because some people, and this is where we get into there are no rules in podcasting. But to me, I'm like, wait a minute, they're book editors, they're movie editors, there's newspaper editors, but for some reason we want to keep it real. I'm just going to talk and hit record and upload. And by all means, you can do that. I don't know about you. I don't speak perfectly. I'm sure somewhere in this presentation, when I listen back to it, I will have said the word right about 50 million times. That's my crutch word when I speak live, right? So anyway, so for me, if you look at Mount Rushmore was a pile of rocks until somebody did some editing. And that's the beauty of it. We're so worried about starting a podcast, and I don't want to sound stupid. It's not radio. You can record a horrible podcast and edit it to be this awesome gem and then release it to the world. You're never going to sound stupid unless you let yourself sound stupid. So don't worry about it and edit your show. If you confuse, you lose. So again, we talked about stories. A lot of people like to talk in jargon. And to me, if I can break that jargon down into steps that my audience can then identify with, they're like, oh, you get that theater of the mind going. And so you want to break those down. So I just brought up a couple here. Live your truth. I hear this a lot now. Oh man, you just go out there and live your truth. And I'm like, is this like advice from one of those like 20-year-old life coaches or something? I'm like, wait, what's going on here? I would ask them, what does live your truth look like? If I was doing an interview with somebody. Happily ever after. If you think about it, that's kind of jargon. And someday, I don't know, maybe I'll live happily ever after. You put on your NPR voice and you go, what does happily ever after sound like to you? Right? Go that route. See, there it was. I just said it right. See, crutch words. Nobody's perfect. You got them, you edit them out later. Constant improvement. That's my own jargon. I say that all the time. I'm built on constant improvement. What does constant improvement look like, Dave? Well, it looks like reading a lot of blogs, reading a lot of books, going to where my audience is, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, that's another jargon. Know your audience. Dave, what does that mean? It's a concept. Get your interview to explain, what does that mean, Dave? Well, knowing my audience means flying to Utah to come meet some really cool people. You know, it means hanging out in Facebook groups and going to local meetups. It means reading magazines that my audience reads. It means to live, breathe, eat, sleep my audience so I know what they want, so I can give them what they want. Awesome, thank you. When you're talking to your audience, no more, hey guys, hey, I'm so glad everybody's here. Don't do that, because you're talking to one person. And it makes you go from, because if I say, hey, I'm so glad everyone's here, and you're listening to that show, you sound like you're in a room with a bunch of other invisible people that you can't see. But I say, I'm so glad you tuned in today. If you could subscribe to the show, I'd really like it. Now I'm talking to you. And I have people come up to me and go, Dave, when I listen to your show, it sounds like you're talking to me. And I go, that's because I am. One person, because if you think about it, we're listening in earbuds, we're listening in the car. It's not like it's the 1930s and hey, let's all gather around and listen to the podcast. No. So talk to one person. And then always ask yourself this, why? Why is this interesting? Because if you can't answer that question, we got a problem, right? Why does my audience care about this? Because if you can't answer that question, we got a problem. And so when I do interviews, I take the question one at a time and I go, all right, here's the question, here's the answer. Did that question deliver value? Yes, okay, it can stay. If the answer is no, it goes. It's got to be entertaining, it's got to be educational, it's got to be interesting, it's got to be something my audience cares about. It's sometimes a nemesis. Not a bad microphone, by the way, the Blue Yeti. You just have to use it right. But I see so many people that do this. They put it on a table and they want to record 10 people with it. Will it pick up the 10 people? Yes. Will it sound like they're in the bathroom? Yes. Not good. And then if you're Charlie Sheen, you're talking to the top of it. If you're whoever this person is, maybe she's laughing because she's realizing she's using it wrong. You don't talk into the top of a Blue Yeti. You also don't put it a foot and a half away from you because, again, that just doesn't work when you put the mic way out here. Doesn't work. So now this might work for catching up with grandma or the nieces or nephews when you're on Skype. It's not going to work enough for a podcast. There are 750,000 shows in Apple Podcasts. Not all of those are live, but if your show sounds like a bathroom, it's going to be pretty easy to find another one that doesn't. So the sister one is the Blue help me, Snowball. Not a bad microphone if you use it right. And if you notice, Bobby's got it right by his mouth. Good. I'd put a pop filter there, but, you know. Okay. Okay, so, but, you know, so here's another. I love this one. It's a Blue Snowball. She's got a pop filter, which is great. And pop filters, by the way, I just did one. If you put your mouth in front of your microphone, if you just put your hand and say happy peanut butter, you will feel a bunch of air. Everybody do that. Put your hand up and say happy peanut butter. Yeah, you feel the air. So when that goes into the microphone, it doesn't sound good. So I love the fact that she has a pop filter, but she's also a mile away from the microphone. Don't do that. Instead, everyone gets a microphone. Just pretend you're Oprah. You get a microphone. You get a microphone. Everyone gets a microphone. I love the Samson Q2U. It's like $59. You can get all this stuff. They have a package for it. It's $105. And it sounds really great. Plus, it works with a mixer, or you can plug it directly into your computer. Growing your audience. Dave, how do you grow your audience? How am I doing on time? 7 minutes. All right, good. I was talking faster. I'm like, all right, I think I'm good. Number one, we already mentioned this. Who the heck is your audience? And that is step one. If you haven't done that yet, stop. This is not a case where you can do steps 4 and 5. You got to do step 1. Determine what they need. Why? Because I'll give you an example. I remember when I was married, I would buy my wife flowers all the time. And I thought I was just scoring points like nobody's business, because who buys their wife flowers all the time? And finally, the one day she said, you know, would it hurt you? I appreciate the flowers. You always buy my favorites. She goes, but like, would it hurt you to like run the sweeper every now and then? She goes, I actually would get more out of the sweeper than I would from the flowers. So you might think that you're giving your audience what they want. Find out what they want. Because actually running the sweeper was free, aside from the electricity. I'd have to go to it was easier. So know what they want. Create content that motivates them to share it. If you ever listen to a podcast, I do this all the time. And if it's really good, I listen to Overcast. I'm like, hold on, clip, share this via over that, and it's out on Twitter. Because I want my audience to go, check this out. This is cool. That's the kind of content you want to make. And I'll explain more about that in a second. Go to where your audience is. Whether that's a Facebook group, a meetup group, a local group, it's in Utah, wherever it is, go to where your audience is, and then do not skip this step. Make friends. Think about this. Think about if I just walked in here, Brand didn't introduce me, and I just come in, and I'm like, hey, I'm Dave. Hey, everybody. You guys like podcasting? Oh, my gosh, you guys got to join the schoolofpodcasting.com. And you'd be like, excuse me, Bobby, I think we need security, right? You're like, who is this guy? Because you don't know me. I'm just some random dude that came in here. You've got to make friends, and you got to bring value to the conversation. Because otherwise, I'll give you a true story. Back before Facebook, that makes me sound very old, there were forums. And I found a forum for ex-DJs. And I swear when I saw it, I heard like angels like, oh. And I was like, oh my gosh, people that know microphones, people that probably want to get back on the air. Oh my gosh, this is like a podcast consultant's dream. And I walked in, I said, hey, I'm Dave Jackson. Everybody, you should go. 20 minutes, completely banned, gone. They're like, I don't know who this spamming idiot is, but get him out of here. And I was like, no, you're my target. Make friends with your target audience, then tell them about your show. Do not skip that step. Because when you make friends and you bring value to the conversation, now they want to hear your show. They're like, oh, you do a podcast? And you're like, yeah, it's a thing. No. Well, where can I find it? Because you've made friends. And then repeat a lot. Go back to determine what they need, create content, go to where they are, make friends, tell them about your show. Get feedback when you go out to where they are. So if somebody tells me today, hey, I listen to your show, I'm probably going to ask you. I'm turning into Peter Brady. I don't know why. I'm probably going to ask you, why do you like my show? And I'm probably going to ask you, what do you wish I would talk about more? Find out what your audience wants. And then 70% of podcasts are heard via word of mouth, not via finding them in iTunes, Apple Podcasts, not It's from people going, wait till you hear this show. 70%. So that's what we want to do. We want to make content that makes people share your show. Don't let this be your podcast. We all have a message. We all have a passion. And don't look back on your deathbed and go, oh man, I should have done that podcast. I really should have. It's scary. You can do it. If you've ever uploaded a image to Facebook, then you can upload an MP3 file to your media host. If you've ever been in the car and your jam came on and you're like, yeah, and then the phone rang and you turn the radio down so you can hear the phone. You know how to mix audio. You can do this. Trust me. So thank you so much. That's all I got. And whatever you do, my last point today, you're going to learn a lot of stuff here today. Knowledge is only action when you do something with it. So don't walk out of here today in Utah and go, yeah, that was great. Go home and do something with it. So thank you.
All right, let's hear it for Dave Jackson.
Thank you, sir.
All right, two quick things.